Some time ago, I filmed a video which was titled "Who would win in a fantasy matchup between Anthony Joshua and Joseph Parker?" It wasn't a matchup that I saw as likely to happen at this stage, but nonetheless was keen to discuss. Now, the YouTube channel I run, fairly modest in size. I'm lucky enough to have a few viewers from New Zealand, a few viewers from the UK, and typically my videos don't get too many hits. But this video I filmed on Anthony Joshua versus Joseph Parker just happened to be the most successful video I've ever done in terms of number of views. And it's one that seems to have continued. Sometimes I put up a video and I get a couple of hundred views and then it pretty much stops. This one, I constantly see new comments on it, even though it was filmed, months and months and months ago now. Now, a number of people have emailed me after the recent Joseph Parker and Anthony Joshua fights, asking if I could do an update to that video. And of course, I'm keen to do that. Effectively, since Joshua Johnson, since Parker versus Saglam, has my opinion changed on what would happen if these two guys fought? Now, just for those who didn't see the initial video, or even if you did, I'll briefly highlight what I said. Two guys, endless amount of potential. Joseph Parker, for me, slightly edging it in terms of level of opposition and in terms of versatility that he's shown in the ring. The fact that Parker had gone rounds, the fact that Parker has been hurt in fights and won, the fact that Parker has shown a chin. Essentially, whilst I thought it would be a close fight that I couldn't predict with certainty, I've gone with Joseph Parker. I've leant towards Joseph Parker. So to answer the question, and where are we now? June 2015. Has my opinion changed? Well, I must say that to an extent it has actually changed, and I do now have a slight difference of opinion. Joseph Parker, very, very good fighter. He's shown he can go rounds in a fight. He's shown he carries immense punching power. He's an excellent combination puncher. He's got good amateur skills. But for me, there is a tendency in his game where he neglects to do the things I know that he's capable of. I know Joseph Parker at his best is a good mover. I know that Joseph Parker at his best has got a good jab. And I know that at his best, Joseph Parker has a strong amateur background and technical capability. But time and time again in his fights, and I saw this early on in his career when he was getting into wars and getting cut by lesser fighters, and I'm seeing it again now, he is slightly neglecting elements to his game. Now, it is very possible that that is because the level of opposition that he's in with is not motivating him, is not challenging him, is not making him nervous. And it may be that it all comes together when he steps up to face top 10, top 15 level. But at the minute, and despite the fact that he took care of Saglam in very convincing fashion, I saw him becoming slightly more flat-footed. I saw him slightly neglecting the jab. I saw him looking to load up on shots and having a tendency to lead with hooks. I saw him completely forget his defence. I saw him eat several overhand rights from a limited, slow, predictable fighter in Saglam. At no stage was Parker in trouble. At no stage did Parker look like he was going to get hurt or lose the fight. But the difficulty is Parker is not far off a level where he's going to need to be fighting guys like David Price, like Derek Chisora, like Carlos Takam. He's going to have to be fighting now those top 20 guys, those borderline top 15 guys. And I have concerns if he continues to neglect his fundamentals. He could struggle when he moves up in grade. Now don't get me wrong, Parker is a fantastic talent who I'm a massive fan of, and it's very early stages in his career. There's no need to rush him and no need to be concerned about his development. But you wouldn't want to be Joseph Parker if he was getting hit by those rights that Saglam was throwing and they were coming from David Price, or specifically if they were coming from Anthony Joshua for the purposes of this video. You wouldn't want to see Parker against Derek Chisora if he neglected his movement and neglected his jab. I believe Parker could quite easily outbox Chisora if he got on his bike, fought behind a jab, kept him at range. But it becomes a dangerous game if he starts with hooks, if he forgets his movement, and if he just gets into a brawl with a guy like Derek Chisora. Fundamentally, Parker is not going to get to the top simply by knocking opponents out, simply by fighting at mid-range, and simply by throwing hooks. He's going to win fights by opening gaps with his jab, circling opponents using his movement and athleticism, and then essentially, when the gap opens, landing fast, hard combinations of technically capable, technically good punches. You know, when he goes up in levels, the hooks, the defensive frailties, they need to disappear. Anthony Joshua, on the other hand, is a fighter that I've been sceptical of. And to an extent, I think it's fair to say I've been critical of throughout his career. But the point is that Anthony Joshua just fought Kevin Johnson. Now, Kevin Johnson is a guy who... it's debatable how good he is. At his best, he was a very solid operator. But he's now in the autumn of his career, and it appears that he's just turning up to fights for a payday. Nevertheless, one could make a fairly strong argument that out of Parker and Joshua's resumes, Kevin Johnson is the top opposition that either guy has been in with. Let's not forget, Kevin Johnson fought Vitaly Klitschko for the heavyweight championship of the world. You know, he's been there at a certain level. And in my opinion, Anthony Joshua took out a guy there who, you know, well, factually, he took out a guy, end of the first round, start of the second round, who'd been the distance with Fury, Chisora, Klitschko. You know, he took out a real solid operator, and he did it in really, really violent, clinical fashion. Kevin Johnson's not an offensively minded fighter, but in this fight, Anthony Joshua took nothing. You know, he worked behind the jab. The jab was key to setting things up. He was clearly the athlete in the ring. He was controlling the reins, and the power was there. I mean, I think people were saying he knocked Johnson's teeth out or something. It was a really impressive performance. Now, don't get me wrong. There are still elements to Joshua's game that need to be improved, and there are still much more unanswered questions from Anthony Joshua than there is Joseph Parker. We know that rounds 6 and 7, Joseph Parker can still be there and still have stamina to fight on. We don't know that about the muscular Joshua. We know that Joseph Parker can still come back and win a fight after he's been hit, after he's been cut, after he's been hurt. We don't know that about Anthony Joshua. We do know he's been hurt badly in the amateurs and rumoured to have been hurt in sparring. So, in terms of how the fight would go, it's very, very hard to predict. But, in many ways, Parker is still the safe bet. Because if Joshua gets to round 5, I wonder how much has he got left in the tank. If Parker hits Joshua, I wonder how's Joshua's jawline going to hold up. But the truth is that Anthony Joshua is the bigger man, the rangier man. And at this stage of his career, I have to say that I believe Joshua has the better jab. And with Joseph Parker showing a slight tendency to neglect his, that would be a big thing for Anthony Joshua. Because if Joseph Parker comes forward against Joshua, like he did against Saglam, if he ignores the lateral movement, if he doesn't try and work his way in behind a jab, and if he comes forward in a sort of predictable straight line fashion, leading with hooks, I think Joshua's going to be able to pick him off from range. I really do. Instead, Parker would have to take the fight late. He'd have to be elusive. He'd have to get on his bike. He'd have to move around Joshua. He'd have to keep his hands high. He'd have to show defensiveness that he didn't show in the Saglam fight. He'd have to keep his hands high, his chin down, and his head moving, combined with lateral movement. If he did that, if he took Joshua late into the fight, if he tested his stamina, and if he was able to land on Joshua, it's a 50-50 fight. But in my eyes, Joshua's shown a lot of improvement lately. You know, he's less rigid. There's more snap to his work. I'm more convinced of the power he possesses. There are still intangibles there, but Joshua is putting in improved performances. Whereas in my eyes, and I know this, I don't want this to sound overly critical, but in my eyes, it's hard to say that Joseph Parker's last fight moved in the right direction, despite the fact he won by knockout in round 2, I think it was. I personally would have been happy to see him go 5 or 6 with Saglam if he, had shown complete defensive mastery, if he, spent 3 or 4 rounds moving and jabbing and then went in for the kill. But he didn't. And that tendency to get the job done quickly and to negate the fundamentals could cost him if he steps up in grade. My thing is, it's still a 50 fight. There are intangibles on each side. But before, I said I'd give a slight lean to Parker. Now, as Anthony Joshua started to improve in opposition, started to answer a few questions, and shown quite a bit of discipline, I lean away from Parker, and I actually lean to Anthony Joshua, and I make him my slight favourite in this fight. One thing that doesn't change is I still think it's nowhere near happening, but fascinating to discuss along the way. Let me know your thoughts. As always, keen to discuss. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.